Well, great to see you today. Happy New Year. How many of you would agree we need more love in the world? Oh boy. Yeah. I woke up yesterday morning, found out we had taken over Venezuela, and I'm starting a whole series on love, so need more love in the world. This series, Adventures in Love, is going to take us through the first couple of months of the new year. The first thing we're going to look at is our concept of God. God is love. We're going to dive into that. We're going to also dive into some of the reasons why people don't always hold to a God of love and try to examine that a little bit. Then we're going to look at how can we love others. And we're going to even dive into difficult things like how do you love people through conflict or through disagreement or through strong disagreement, or how do you love an enemy? Those are all challenging things, right? And then we're going to talk about even loving ourselves. How do we develop self-compassion for our own selves? And then how do we then disseminate that as we live in this world? How do we live in a war-torn world, in a world of violence and hatred and revenge and greed and all of this stuff that goes on? How do we root ourselves in the core value of love? And I think it first starts with our concept of God. If you don't have a concept of a loving God, then you can pretty much justify anything. And so we're going to really try to look at this, first of all, concept of God, okay? Concept of God, adventures in love. Now, I want to share with you, I've been working in the recovery world now, 12-step world, for over 6 years. AA was founded in 1935. Yeah, and there's over 100,000 AA groups around the world. And what's fascinating about AA is that the first step is admitting that your life has become unmanageable and that you're powerless over, and with AA it's alcohol, but you could just put in there anything you wanted to put in there. It could be food or gambling or video games or you name it, right? We can go down rabbit holes and try to pacify ourselves and numb ourselves out and that kind of thing. And what's interesting is that about 50% of the people who come to an AA or 12-step meeting are atheists or agnostics. I work with addicts and alcoholics every week of my life, and I have met easily hundreds of people who would fit that category, atheist or agnostic, over the last 6.5 years, who then come to AA and then wrestle with this powerlessness. And if I'm powerless and my life is unmanageable, one of the things we start challenging people to do is have a higher power, right? But that can be challenging for people, because what I've realized is that many people have grown up with a concept of a punishing God, a God who's out to get you. He's making a list, he's checking it twice, he's gonna find out who's naughty or nice, and if you're on the naughty side of that, watch out, he's gonna fry your behind. And so there's a ton of people who need help with sobriety but stumble even over that basic idea of God because they've rejected that punishing God kind of a concept, right? I want to read to you a page out of the big book. This is a big book. This is like the big print big book. But I'm going to read you from page 12, and this is from Bill Wilson's story, who is one of the founders of AA, okay? And he wrestled with this concept of a punishing God, okay? And he was wanting to get sober. One of his friends had found help from God, but he was struggling with the God concept, all right? So I want to just read, there's like 3 paragraphs from Bill Wilson's story, all right? He says, despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, This feeling intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. I've since talked with scores of people who felt the same way. My friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, quote, and I've used this phrase on a lot of people now, "Why don't you choose your own conception of God?" Now, some of you might think, well, that's not the way it works, you know. Don't just choose your own concept of God, but on a certain part, there is that. Like, people do actually choose concepts of God. And sometimes they latch onto what I would consider very unhealthy concepts of God. In fact, I would even go so far as to say some gods deserve to die. Some concepts of God deserve to die. Okay? So I actually think this is and by the way, if you're against a certain concept of God and you think that's the only way to think about God, then this opens a door for people to explore a new concept of God, right? And I actually think that's important for all of us, whether you're wrestling with sobriety issues or not. We really need to think about our concept of God. In these first few messages of the new year, we're going to really dig into some of these things, okay? He said, that statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Thus was I convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. At long last, I saw, I felt, I believed, the scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. Isn't that interesting? Let me put that big book down there. It's going to take up my whole platform here. My favorite verse of my life over the last few years has been 1 John 4:16. Some of you who've been around know it well. God is love. Those who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. 1 John 4:16. That's foundational. It's interesting, there's very few times when it says, God is boom, like God is love. There's another one, God is light, and in him there's no darkness. There's another one, God is spirit, those who worship him in spirit and truth. See, but there's a lot of times where there's like similes, like the spirit is like the wind, you know, things like that, but, or like fire, or like this, or like that, but God is love. If you don't have a God of love, you're in trouble. What's interesting is that those who hold to a punishing God idea, they're really happy when God punishes their enemies, when God punishes somebody else that they don't like, when God punishes somebody that they don't agree with their lifestyle or something. They're all happy about that, but when it comes to punishing them, it's like, oh, everybody wants a loving God when it comes to themselves. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm in trouble. So how do we develop a concept of God centered in love that is consistent? First, let's ask this question. What is love? What is love? Give me a one word or at least a phrase. What is love? Acceptance, unconditional, selfless, caring, adoration, looking out for well-being of creation, everything, everybody. Okay, I like that. What else? Affection. Yeah, and there's an emotional side to love. So yeah, excellent. So in the English language, we use love, and it can mean a ton of different things, right? In the Greek language, there's many words for love. Many of you are familiar with eros, which is the Greek word for sexual or emotional love. It doesn't have to be like sex. It can just be the things in life that breathe in beauty and creativity and those kinds of things that lead to the emotional, affective side of love. That's eros. Phileo, by the way, it's where we get the word erotic. Phileo is in the city Philadelphia, you know. It can be friendship love is basically what phileo is. And then we have this deep, deep word agape love, which centers in the kind of love that we often talk about, God's unconditional love, right? I like to define love as acting intentionally. When we act, when God acts, when anything acts intentionally in a relational response to God and others and all creation with the aim to promote well-being, or shalom is the word for well-being in the Hebrew. Or we could say love is about wholeness making, when we act in ways that create flourishing and wholeness and well-being for ourselves, for those around us, and for the entire world and creation. That's what love is, for me, centrally about. And so I believe in a God of love. God of love. Now, it's interesting, if you have ever read the Old Testament, any of you done that? All right. There are some concepts of God in there that can be quite troubling. If you've ever read, any of you read the Bible? Yeah. It's a complicated book, okay? So let's first think about Jesus, because what was Jesus's Bible? It was the Old Testament. It was the Hebrew Bible, okay? And I'm going to be centering my thoughts very much in Jesus's take on his Bible, all right? Because Jesus was an interpreter of the Hebrew Bible and had very intentional ways of interpreting that Hebrew Bible through the lens of, what was Jesus' primary lens when he interpreted the Hebrew Bible? You guessed right. Good job. Love. In fact, it's very clear. I mean, when they were challenging Jesus, which is the greatest commandment in all of the law, the Torah? If you go through and analyze the Torah and look at the commands, the imperative commands in the Torah, you're going to come up with about 613 commands in the Torah. Many of those are positive commands, do this, but some of them are negative commands, don't do this, okay? And so Jesus very quickly, didn't even hesitate about the 613. He just said, that's pretty simple. Number one, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. That's the Shema. It's read every Saturday in a synagogue, Deuteronomy 6:4. And then the other one that he chose comes out of Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbor as yourself. These are the two greatest commands. Everything else, the prophet, all the other parts of the Hebrew Bible, that's what it's all about. So Jesus' interpretive lens of the Hebrew Bible is love. The primacy of love as we look at all of life, all of Scripture, and even the Hebrew Bible as we look at it through the way Jesus interpreted. The Apostle Paul, if you think about him, what was primary in Apostle Paul's teaching? I do weddings for a living, done hundreds of them. Some people I've known dearly, and some people I don't even remember I did their weddings. I've done a lot of them. Sometimes people come up and say, hey, you did my wedding. I said, awesome, that's great. I don't remember what I did 3 days ago, let alone 10, 20, 30 years ago. Yeah, but 1 Corinthians 13 I read it every time I do a wedding, right? Paul says this, if I could speak all languages of earth and of angels but didn't love others, I would only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I had the gift of prophecy and if I understood all of God's secret plans and possessed all knowledge, and if I had such faith that I could move mountains but didn't love others, I would be nothing. If I gave everything I have to the poor and even sacrificed my body, I could boast about it, but if I didn't love others, I wouldn't have gained anything. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not, it goes on to that. And then it closes out, 3 things will last forever. What are they? Faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. The primacy of love. Now, what's challenging is that when you get into the biblical story, particularly in the Hebrew Bible, there's a lot of mixed ideas about God. In fact, the Hebrew Bible has multivocal voices. There's not just one voice in the Hebrew Bible. There's multiple streams of thought in the Hebrew Bible. Jesus knew this, and yet Jesus consistently selected the streams of the Hebrew Bible that were love. All right? There's also ancient ideas about God in the Hebrew Bible. I like to say, there's characters in the Bible that are there for lessons, but we don't want to imitate them. Right? And even some of the big figures. Moses killed a man. David did some pretty nasty stuff, right? We don't want to imitate all of those folks. There's some bad ideas about God in the Bible. We don't want to hold on to all those bad ideas about God. And Jesus taught us how to view that particular stream of love and brought it out and highlighted it in 4 particular areas. And we're going to look at these 4 areas over the next couple of Sundays because they do affect your concepts of God. Number 1 is violence. There's a stream in the Hebrew Bible that would see God as a very violent God. But then there's also a stream in the Hebrew Bible that sees God as loving, totally loving. There's a stream of God in the Hebrew Bible that is very tribal. We're chosen and everybody else is going to hell. And then there's streams in the Hebrew Bible that talk about how we're to love everybody and being chosen as being chose to serve and be a blessing to everybody. There are streams in the Hebrew Bible that talk about purity culture. And then Jesus tackled many of those issues through the lens of love. And then there's also this whole issue of hell and what's going on there. I've got friends who think God pre-elects people to burn in hell for all eternity. They don't have any choice in it at all. Yeah. It's a wing of Calvinism. Okay? So there's some amazingly bad ideas about God in my view, particularly if you're trying to use the lens of love. Okay? So we're going to be looking at some of these, challenging some of these, and thinking about this. I had a person who came to Christ several years ago who had never read the Bible, didn't really know much about Jesus, had never been to church, and she heard me talking about God's love and how great Jesus was and following Jesus. She gave her life to Jesus, and on her own, she started reading the Bible. Now, if people ask me, if they've never read the Bible, people ask me, I actually don't start them in the Old Testament. I start them in the Gospels of Jesus, and then I like to backfill some of the things back. Because she started in Genesis 1. That's how most people start books, right? How many of you read the end first? I'm just curious. Yeah, see, very, very few people start, even like a novel. Do any of you read the end of the novel before you go back and decide whether you want to read the whole thing? Anyway, that's cheating. Anyway, no. But yeah, so people do that. Well, I recommend that you start with Jesus and then read backwards, okay? because she read Genesis and Exodus, and that was really interesting. I mean, it has, the patriarchal Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then the slavery in Egypt, and then Moses leading the people out of slavery. Hit Leviticus, and it kind of confuses you. She got through Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, okay, but then she hit Joshua and Judges. And in Joshua and Judges, you literally have passages where God is commanding the genocide of a certain group of people. And she read that, and then I got an email like this long. Like, what the blank? What is this book about? Like, she's literally reading it for the first time, right? And she gets that, and it just like, and the record scratches, and like, uh-oh, what am I, I signed up for the wrong thing, And so then I was like, okay, well, let's meet. And so then I had to unpack for her the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about over the next couple of Sundays about God and our concept of God. If you root your concept of God in love, I promise you, you will help yourself thrive and other people thrive. But if you don't root it in love, it's going to take you to some wacky places that aren't loving at all. In fact, many people will justify the opposite of love with a very horrible concept of God. So these are the kind of things we're going to try to unearth here over the next few weeks together before we get into loving others and all the challenges that are there, right? First, let's start with God. Love is supreme. I have a friend who grew up here in Kansas City. Her dad was a police officer. At the age of 12, she started drinking. And she loved alcohol right from the get-go. Felt like it turned her into a different person. Felt like her personality was budding and thriving and all of that. And so she drank, and her dad was at work all the time. Her mom was away. And so she was kind of like a latchkey kid, raised herself, started drinking at 12. This drinking led to drinking and drugging at a very young age before she was out of high school. It eventually led to her getting into abusive relationships. She was raped. She was homeless. She ended up prostituting to get her drugs. And she lived like this from the age of 12 all the way to about 2000 or so. 19 years of living like that. If God was a punishing God, you'd just take a person like that and just write him off. But she wound up in a very hard home for alcoholics. Mostly men were there. Didn't treat women very well, but she found her sobriety in a halfway house that wasn't very, very clean, wasn't very healthy, but she found her sobriety there. She found her God there. She found a God of love and grace there. She found a concept of God that told her that God had loved her from the day she was born, that God had loved her through all of her trials, through all of her drinking, through all of her drugging, through all of her prostitution, through all of her homelessness, through all of the abusive relationships. She found that God had never left her, that God had always loved her. And when she began to give her life to a God of love, it transformed her from the inside out. In 2003, she decided that she wanted to start a ministry for those who are like her, and particularly for women, because there were so few houses for women that would work with women in those kind of difficult situations like the one she was in. And Bobby Joe Reed founded the Healing House in 2003. Today, the Healing House has helped over 10,000 people come off the streets and out of addiction. There are houses now in the Northeast that house over 200 people who, coming from the same place she came from, are finding a God of love, and their lives are being transformed through living the 12 steps and finding a higher power and surrendering their life to a God of love. Listen, if you have any other kind of God, it's not going to go well for you or others. But if you center yourself in love, in the flourishing, in the well-being of all creation, yourself and others, and you believe in a God who is committed to those things as well, great, great healing can rise up in this world that is so broken with hatred and violence and everything else that's going on. Let's be love. Let's walk in love. So we're going to dig into some of these difficult concepts of God, but I'm going to be steering you. I'm going to be steering you intentionally to a God of love. Let's pray. God, come. God of love, come. Minister to us. We need your love. More importantly, we need to be aware of your love. We need to have a fresh revelation of your love. That your love is so deep and so wide that nothing can ever separate us from that love. There's never a moment in our lives where you are not loving us. And your love is like a hound that pursues us and seeks us, even when we're off track and in a distant land. Your love pursues us. Your love seeks after us. And so we ask that you would envelop this community of lovers in the love of God, and that we would receive it, and that we would grow in it, and that we would disseminate it. So come, Spirit of love, fall fresh on us.